Today on the Perception and Action podcast, a look at a study examining the effects of a constraints-led approach to coaching cricket bowling. What type of task constraint manipulations can be used to improve bowling accuracy and discipline? So it's time for a call to action. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action podcast, back with another article review. In this article, I want to look at a paper looking at a constraints-led approach to training bowlers in cricket. So for American audience, like a pitcher in baseball. I want to look at because I think it's a very interesting manipulation of task constraints, right? I think in an effective way. So the authors, this is the paper adopting a constraints-led approach to enhance skill acquisition for fast bowlers in grassroots cricket. Right, so obviously they start off explaining the background of what the constraints-led approach is. Train the athlete to develop functional couplings between their information and their movement. There's no internal model of an optimal performance, right? We're trying to get them to be adaptable and self-organized, right? All the basics of what we talked about on this podcast. What they're going to use is a training intervention looking, essentially going to manipulate the task constraints by getting the athlete to focus their attention on different areas of the zone where they're bowling, right? So they're creating different task constraints by marking off different zones where the athlete is pitching or bowling. They're looking to pursue both the accuracy of the bowling and the discipline, right? So both in terms of, how often do you hit the target? How often do you throw wide of your zone? They're also using a measure, something called no balls, which is a measure of discipline. For non-cricket fans like myself, a no ball is essentially a legal delivery, equivalent to a balk in baseball, which is even more extreme than baseball because you get a run for it, right? So they're going to look at the effect of manipulating these task constraints on these kind of different measures of balls. Also in cricket, you can measure, how far you throw the ball. If you throw a ball really short, right, it makes it easy. It could be, or too long, it can make it easier for the batter to hit, right? So there's a lot of kind of things you can measure in terms of performance. Okay, so what they did was to look at 6 bowlers, right, mean age 20. They're recorded over 12 sessions. Okay, they're asked to do 24 balls. Okay. The one kind of limitation of this study is it's a within subjects designed with no control group, right? So they're comparing when there wasn't the constraints versus when there were for the same group of people. So you could have, you could complain there's practice effects, placebo effects, etc. But just to point that out. So the marking on the constraints manipulation, I think, is a really interesting one. They're marking the zone. At the end of today, I'm going to show a baseball one that I'm a big fan of. So the marking is creating this black zone where which is kind of the optimal length for a ball, and kind of the alignment with the stumps behind the batter. So this is kind of worth the most points. Then they have another zone worth slightly less points. Then they have zones worth negative points when you bowl the ball too wide, right? And so there's this kind of creating. This is interestingly, this relates back to something I talked about before, metastability, right? This is in cricket, there's 2 ways you can as a batter, you can hit the ball on the front foot, so move forward, or hit it off your back foot. So you have this kind of between these 2 movement solutions, this metal stable zone. This pitching the ball in here is kind of forcing them right at that edge of that zone where you could use either stroke, so it creates sometimes called the corridor of uncertainty, right? So they're creating these different kind of targets, these different zones for hitting instead of just throwing to a regulation field. Okay, and they had, as I said, they had people do without the targets first, then they trained with the targets, then they took it away again. Okay. So again, some limitations in the design, but overall, I think kind of an interesting study. So what they found in the study, first of all, when looking at accuracy, right? So this is the control phase with none of these targets. This is after training with the targets. You can see they're consistently more accurate in terms of the number of points, right? They're getting when they have these targets, right? So the constraints do seem to be giving them good feedback. Like one of the things I think this is helping, I will see this when I talk about the baseball example. One of the problems here is batters getting information about and feedback about the quality of the length of their ball, the line. Sometimes it's very difficult in this situation to get good feedback, right? So I think one of the things is these task constraint zones, these zones are doing is helping with feedback. So they got a significant effect on accuracy. They didn't find any effect on discipline, right? Having balls of good length, having no balls was no significantly different after training. So it wasn't like it cured everything, right? But it did seem to help with the accuracy of the balls. Okay, so I think this interesting. So what they found is this manipulation of task constraints, right? Giving batters more feedback about what a good ball is, a good length, good line. Okay, seem to have large effects on accuracy. Okay, but not any effects on discipline. Okay, so it seems to be facilitating some kind of learning, some kind of. So I think it's a good example of a constraints-led approach, right? Allowing an athlete to learn to bowl, adjust their bowling based on information, like based on the information they're getting. Right? You're giving them a goal, a target, right? And they're getting very clear feedback. As I mentioned, there's something that I'm a big fan of in pitching, right? This is something Driveline Baseball has invented, kind of intended tracker, and using kind of this 9-ball, right? So that we use this a lot. I've used this a lot in my baseball practice. So here we have 9 little pockets, right? And you're on every time you're given a goal of hitting for a particular pitch, hitting one of the targets, we track whether you hit the target or not. You have different goals for different pitches. Maybe a certain pitch, all we care about is it's low. So any of those 3 targets would be fine, right? So again, we're giving, not only, I like this kind of constraints manipulation because not only is it more deliberate, right? It's giving athletes very clear goals where we want the pitch to be, like in the game, right? And it's also getting them very, very clear feedback about whether they hit it or not, right? And for different pitches. So I think very, very similar way, I think this can be a very, very effective. Here's one where we have used a similar thing to what you just saw in the cricket, giving information about kind of the pitch in this direction, the batter, so on, right? So I think these types of task constraints manipulations can be beneficial, not only kind of in the traditional constraints-led approach by making an athlete adapt, but I think a lot of the environments we have, we train in lack a couple things. One, they lack clear intentions and goals, right? They, hitting a target. Like in baseball, the catcher puts down their glove in a certain target, but we need to be more deliberate about where do we care where they hit that target, where they miss the target, right? So we need to have intentions. We need to give them clear feedback in practice. So in this one, they can see the ball ended up in that pocket versus this pocket versus hit the rail and went off of it. Okay. So that's why I think these kind of task constraints manipulations, especially playing with targets and zones we're aiming for, can be very, very effective. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including a monthly coaches meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled. Gone through St. Louis.